ask you to please stand for the gospel. The gospel reading today is from the book of John, chapter 21. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter felt hurt because he had said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." The gospel of the Lord.
Christ.
You may be seated.
I screwed up. I was supposed to sign up my daughter for the soccer season. She was really looking forward to playing on the same team again with her good friends. But in order to do that, I had to sign her up in time for tryouts. I don't know if it was because of my bad habit of procrastination or if it was because I forgot. It was probably a combination of the two, but I did not sign her up in time for the tryouts, and therefore she wasn't able to be on the team that she wanted to be on with her friends. And I tried to justify myself and make an appeal to the soccer association to get her back on the team, but it didn't work. And so she ended up being on a different team at a different level of play. And I made a mistake of not signing her up in time. And worse yet, I disappointed people. I disappointed my daughter, who really wanted to be on that team and play with her friends. And I disappointed my wife, who now had to comfort my disappointed daughter. I screwed up. Failure. We all experience it. Maybe it's with some big things in life, like relationships, or jobs, or finances, or health. Or maybe it's with things we do every day, like making mistakes, or poor decisions, or letting others down, or getting into an accident, or more so letting God down. There are two ways of how we can handle failure. We can either do a good job of handling failure and just meeting it head on and getting on with life, or we can do a poor job of dealing with failure and try to pretend that it never happened, it didn't exist, and then just try moving on. One example I think that we're seeing currently of an organization that's not handling failure too well is the Houston Astros. That they have been caught cheating and stealing signs in the 2017 World Series, and now are not really coming forth as much as they could to say they're sorry or showing remorse. In fact, just this past week, superstar baseball player and admitted cheater himself, Alex Rodriguez, went on a ESPN broadcast and talked about the lack of remorse coming from the Houston Astros. Rodriguez commented, "You cheat, you win a championship, there is no suspension and there is no remorse. The last one is probably the worst one, he said. He went on to talk about how when he returned from his suspension, he owned up to it. He acknowledged it, and he tried to change the narrative. But he said, this is something the Houston Astros are not doing. They've been combative, if anything. On the other hand, we have a very good example of how to handle failure in our lives in today's gospel reading, in the interaction between Peter and Jesus in today's gospel reading. Peter was one of Jesus' closest and most committed disciples. He's the one who led his brother and his business partners to follow Jesus. He's the one who first confessed Jesus to be the Christ, the Son of God. He's the one who defended Jesus when the people came to arrest him. He cut off the ear of one of the servants coming to arrest him. And Jesus said of Peter, "You are a rock, and on this rock, Peter, on you I will build my church." Basically saying that Peter is the foundation of the church. And then when Jesus predicted that Peter would deny him 3 times on the night before he would die, before he would be crucified, Peter said, "No, never. Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you," Peter said. But Peter had an epic fail. Epic. He ended up denying Jesus 3 times. On the night before he was crucified, when Jesus was on trial, he was standing around with the crowd, and on 3 separate occasions, 3 bystanders came up to Peter and said, "Hey, you were with him. You were one of his disciples, weren't you?" And 3 times he said, "No, I was not." Imagine how Peter must have felt. That here Jesus considered him to be the lead disciple, that on him the church would be built. The one who Jesus told him, "Hey, you're gonna deny me 3 times. And Peter's saying, "No, absolutely not, never." And then he does. What an epic failure. But it's also from Peter's interaction with Jesus today that we get a good lesson in how we can handle our failures in life. First of all, just that Peter was there. Just that Peter hung in there with the disciples after his failure and after Jesus had been crucified. I mean, think about it. How tempting would it be after a failure like that to just leave? To just abandon the disciples and try to put it all behind you and move on with your life. But Peter didn't. He hung in there. He stayed with the disciples. And then, now in today's reading, we see Jesus and Peter interacting with each other, and they are doing so on the beach at the Sea of Galilee. This is the 3rd resurrection appearance for Jesus. He's been raised from the dead. He now appears to his disciples a 3rd time on the beach. And just before today's conversation, the resurrected Jesus is standing on the beach, and the disciples are out in a fishing boat. They're fishing, and the resurrected Jesus calls out to them from the beach. And Peter right away jumps into the water. He doesn't even wait for the boat to get in, to take time for the boat to get into the beach. He jumps into the water and swims to shore and gets to Jesus. And Jesus asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And Peter 3 times says, "Lord, you know that I love you." In this interaction, Peter never directly admits his failure, but we know that by his jumping into the water, by his approaching Jesus and saying 3 times to Jesus that he loves him, it is his admission of failure and looking to Jesus for forgiveness. And Jesus brings him back into relationship with him, and Jesus gives him work to do. Feed my sheep, tend my sheep. And And so right there, we learn some very good things about how to respond in times of failure. To hang in there, to acknowledge or admit our failure, and to get the work done, to get working. These three things actually that Peter exhibits appear with a national campaign years ago that studied in communication classes and public relation classes about how to come back from failure. It happened in 1982 with the Tylenol crisis. Some of you may remember this. How in the fall of 1982, someone took a bunch of packages of extra-strength Tylenol from the store shelves in the Chicago area, emptied them, took the capsules out, and put in cyanide lace capsules back into the packages and put them up on the shelves around the Chicago area. And immediately, the makers of Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson, informed the public of the tainted product, admitted their failure in the packaging, and had a national recall of all products of Tylenol. And they didn't have to. They had just localized it to the Chicago area, but instead they did a whole national recall of the product. Then they got to work rebuilding the public's trust and developing new packaging standards that we still have in place today for most of our products. The Tylenol formula for reacting to failure is the same as what Peter did. Hang in there, acknowledge the failure, and get the work done. Get on to work. It's great advice for us when we fail. And we could just end the sermon right here, and we'd have great advice for what to do in times of failure. But Jesus gives us more. There's more that's going on in Peter's interaction with Jesus. First of all, Jesus forgives him. And how much does that mean to us Christians, knowing that when we make mistakes, when we fail, we are forgiven? Because that's what Jesus does with Peter. Jesus actually never says to Peter, "You are forgiven." But because Jesus asks the question, "Do you love me?" and Peter responds, "You know, Lord, that I love you." And he does that 3 times. Basically, Jesus is wiping out the 3 times that Peter denied him. So when we have failures, Jesus forgives us and wipes out our failures. And Jesus not only provides forgiveness for Peter, but Jesus also provides for Peter a sense of belonging and a purpose. That when Jesus forgives Peter, Jesus is bringing Peter back into relationship with him and with the community. He's restoring the relationship, and he's giving Peter some very important and meaningful work to do. Feed my sheep. Tend my sheep. Basically, Jesus is telling him, care for other people. That's what it is. That's what tending sheep and caring for sheep is. Care for other people and care for the world that God made. You know, recently there have been some studies done on happiness, on the topic of happiness. What makes people happy? What factors contribute to longer life and greater sense of fulfillment? And the research covered a wide range of different things, but really it boiled down to 2 things that really made people feel happy. And that was a sense of belonging to a community and a sense of making a difference. A sense of the belief that what you do matters. And that's what Jesus gives to Peter. Jesus gives to Peter that sense of belonging and purpose. And Jesus does the same with you and me. That when you and I fail, Jesus not only forgives us, but Jesus brings us back into a relationship with him and the community, and Jesus gives us important and meaningful work to do. When we fail, we can certainly learn from those who have done a good job in overcoming their failure. We can hang in there. We can admit our failure, and we can move on with the work that is before us. But also as Christians, we can know that Jesus forgives us and that Jesus says to you, you are my disciple, you are my follower, you are a part of my community, and I have some very important and meaningful work for you to do in caring for the others in the world that God loves so much. And I invite you to come and do that work today and every day. Thanks be to God. Amen.